All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Indigenous Voices and Resource Development Podcast. I'm your host, the Executive Director, John Desjarlais, and with me today, incredibly excited, someone I've known for a while, quite a while, and really admired their work. We have Mr. Guy Lonechild, the CEO of the First Nations Power Authority. How are you doing, Guy?
Doing excellent. Thank you, John.
Awesome. And so, tons to get into, to dive into and talk about. But one of the first things we like to kind of understand is, of course, our kinship networks, right? And so tell us a little bit about, who is Guy? Where's Guy from? A little bit about where Guy grew up. And then, tell us about your kinship ties.
So I grew up on the White Bear First Nation, spent a lot of time on Cowes First Nation, went to residential school at Maryville, at LeBret, grew up all over Western Canada, from British Columbia to Northwest Territories in Alberta, spent some time in California, but most of my childhood was at White Bear, Southeast Saskatchewan, 2 hours drive from Regina, Southeast. And just grew up with a Cree Soto family. My dad is from White Bear. My mom is from Cowes. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents and just really benefited from the rich culture and history of White Bear as a community.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was very fortunate too. Like, while, I of course grew up with my mother and my father, but we lived also with my chapan, right? My great grandmother. And a lot, I think, of what I've learned can be attributed to a lot of, our elders around us. And so it's pretty formative. And I want to talk about a little bit about that experience later. But so, you've been to a lot of places, you've grew up in a lot of places, and you've grew up in community, and you grew up across Canada and whatnot. And so how did that experience shape, I think, your path into, you became a leader, an elected leader and an informal leader, and you've, certainly helped lead FNPA to where it is today. So tell us a little bit about that. How did who you were growing up drive you into leadership and that type of service to your people, to our people?
Yeah, I think from an early age, education has kind of been my salvation. Grew up very, very poor, like not with a whole lot of money and not a lot to eat. And parents were struggling with their own challenges and, being placed in various homes and this and that. Realize, I think, that education and focusing on school at a very young age helped me to become a leader in the classroom. So helping other students who were struggling, I think that's been a passion of mine. It still is today. Went back to school at 38 or 40 years old and got a master's of business administration. I think leading by example is kind of one of the things. Even though if you're dealt a raw deal as a young person, just make the best of it. Learn from other leaders to say, hey, make the best of life. It's yours. And empower yourself to make positive change in your life. And I think leadership is in all of us when we make decisions and act on those decisions. And for what we do in whether it's politics or informal or formal leadership roles, it's about doing your best every day and coming with a better version of yourself each and every day. And it's really, life is a gift. And so leadership is also about love. It's about self-love, and it's about giving love and showing inspiration to others that if they have a great idea, if they want to start a business, if they want to be supported in the work that we do in terms of electricity generation, all of that is about self-sufficiency, self-determination, whether that's at the individual level, the community level, the regional level, or the national level. And so the FNPA is all about, self-determination and self-sufficiency in its work that we do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I was thinking education and, investing in yourself. And you actually reminded me of when the first time our paths crossed, and it was at First Nation University of Canada, and there was a rally, and you invited the Indigenous Students Council out of the University of Saskatchewan to come and participate. And as president, and I brought my delegation, and so I brought and instead of me speaking for 2 minutes, I think we cut it up. And so I don't know if we were supposed to do that, but we did it because it was important to hear from, the rest of my council. But it was where my first chance to kind of connect with you. And I was inspired in terms of organizing and the importance around education, right? And so that was really cool. FNPA, and great segue into that. An organization that is driving, Indigenous ownership, partnership, building capacity, and power. So tell us a little bit about, where did the inception come from? And when you got involved, what was, what what did growing that organization look like? But tell us a little bit about the history and context for people who might not necessarily understand First Nation Power Authority.
Okay. I always ask this question, how far do you want me to go back?
Right?
Because
Yeah.
in 2011, we got our start with an MOU with the province of Saskatchewan talking about the underrepresentation of Indigenous people in the electricity sector. And so, as chief of the FSIN in
Mhm.
2011, we advanced discussions with then Minister Bill Boyd, key staff members, the SAS Power group. On behalf of the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations at the time, we said, okay, we need to be a part of this economy. We're not a part of the provincial economy in ways that we need to be. I think just breaking the mold of the Crown Corporation model, the monopoly that exists in many parts of Canada, we wanted to play a leadership role. The FSIN was a leader in already establishing institutions like the First Nations University of Canada, the Saskatchewan Gaming Authority. The list goes on in terms of proud institutional development. And so
Mhm.
the FNPA was born out of the same idea where
Mhm.
socio-technical capacity in the
Mhm.
academic world means let's build from the ground up capacity to manage our own energy systems, to create our own electrons, to be self-sufficient, self-determining, to grow our own economy based upon our way of development. And so the FNPA, I think, is just about that. It's about
Mhm.
empowering First Nations, Métis communities to do just that. And
Mhm.
so now that we are operating in a number of different provinces, and we want to establish and look at the FNPA potentially being a Manitoba sector, or the FNPA here in British Columbia. I'm giving a talk this afternoon on a panel
Mhm.
talking about socio-technical capacity and what that means in terms of building this resource we have, this young resource
Mhm.
of people who want to find their own career path, and let's help to inspire them in terms of clean electricity and clean technology. So it's an exciting pathway. So we are the pathway to powerful opportunities is our tagline. It's been so since 2012. So we just want to empower people to make their own decisions, create opportunities for energy sovereignty.
Yeah, that's incredible. And
Hmm.
we've got to watch as an individual, as someone from with an engineering and a technical
Right.
background, and then and as someone who now advocates for Indigenous participation in resource development, it's exciting watching that journey because I'm also inspired. And again, like you mentioned, that socio-technical capacity. How do we get our people really excited about the science, right?
Yeah.
Own that and get involved in that, and then build out these systems maybe that might look a little bit different, but they'll still serve their needs. They'll still deliver energy. They'll still deliver power. But we have our people fully engaged in that process, right? And so, um, that's one of the really neat things about organizations like yours is they have that social element about building people, right? And training and developing and getting more involved with these different sectors and these different energy types and then really
Hmm.
owning that, right? And so that's really cool. You talked a little bit about, FNPA works is kind of started in Saskatchewan, but certainly is not just a provincial organization. It's a national organization. So tell us a little bit about that growth throughout the different provinces and your involvement in Manitoba, Alberta, BC, and of course in Ontario and outside that.
We decided to establish the FNPA Canada as a federally incorporated body out of Calgary, Alberta, a few years back.
Hmm.
And what still exists is the main First Nations Power Authority of Saskatchewan, who has the direct relationship with First Nations in the province with
Hmm.
SAS Power. But we soon started to expand our operations out into Ontario. We work with 55 First Nations in Ontario on
Yep.
energy efficiencies, proudly saying, okay, demand side management programs, energy efficiency, doing retrofits in communities is not just an opportunity to be responsible in terms of our power usage, but also be sustainable. And so it's not just about power generation where we cut our teeth in Saskatchewan with small solar projects, 10 megawatt projects to scale. We're soon announcing 100 megawatt scale solar projects in the
Hmm.
next 30 days here. But we're also play a meaningful role in national policy development. So
Hmm.
national policy leadership in terms of what does success look like in procurement in the power sector. So we've
Hmm.
been advising BC Hydro for a good 4 years now about their power calls. We've just signed an agreement with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs to look at establishment of the First Nations Power Authority of Manitoba. And so the power calls in Manitoba, the 600 megawatts that are of wind, is fast approaching. So we're putting together the nuts and bolts of partnerships in that province as well. In Alberta, the Rep Round 2 and was for First Nations and Métis communities to say, hey, here's what our project looks like, whether it's wind or solar. And that
Mhm.
was a smashing success where it created record low prices for wind and for
Mhm.
solar in that province as well throughout the country. And so I think our impact has been one of here's what can be done if we indigenize the sector, if we
Mhm.
indigenize crown corporations or the way they operate, so that we actually not just can listen to recommendations, but also hire our people, because
Mhm.
they ask the question, what's in it for us at the
Mhm.
community level? What does meaningful engagement look like? So early, often, and meaningful engagement in
Mhm.
the power sector is fast evolving to a point where we've got meaningful engagement with meaningful economic participation, 51% ownership as a minimum standard for Hydro One, for
Mhm.
example, in Ontario. We've got small modular reactor technology development being tried at the Ontario Power Generation in meaningful engagement with First Nations in that province. We've
Mhm.
got a great opportunity in Saskatchewan with White Bear First Nations and Sask
Mhm.
Power. The very first impact benefits agreement in the electricity sector likely will
Mhm.
be signed within the next year to two.
Mhm.
And power transmission development, the North Coast transmission line in BC. So we're
Mhm.
looking at arranging financing options for BC
Mhm.
First Nations to own phase two of that line. So there's really good, meaty stuff that we're actually working on that
Mhm.
actually says, okay, we're not just going to own it, but we're going to develop it, we're going to build it, we're going to own it, operate, and maintain it. And if we can transfer those skills and that experience that FNPA has into different segments, we'll start to see that economic sovereignty, that
Mhm.
economic self-sufficiency, and the energy sovereignty flourish. And so
Yeah.
that's our goal.
No kidding. So you guys have been doing it for a while. Have you seen, like, where have you seen, what are some of the examples of that full participation, of that economic sovereignty, of that, even that ownership and that maintaining? What does that look like? What are some of the examples where that's, people are operating, you've
The
got technicians and.
I think the very best, well, some of the very best examples are in Ontario.
Mhm.
Six Nations. Matt
Mhm.
Jacobson is doing some fabulous stuff in battery storage. Canada's largest known facility like that
Mhm.
is being developed and
Yeah.
being maintained and being
Yeah.
built by them and by companies that they own.
Yeah.
And so those are the types of real tangible benefits
Yeah.
on the, again, we say developing, building, owning, operating,
Yeah.
maintaining. And so that whole spectrum of opportunity needs to be a prerequisite to actually going into this. How are we
Yeah.
planning for the maintaining of that? So we've got what is it, Five Nations Energy out of
Mhm.
Ontario, transmission line, owning it and actually hiring people, and got workforces in
Mhm.
the hundreds of workforce, hundreds of people. And
Yeah.
so we've got Wayte Power
Mhm.
Corporation,
Yeah.
building transmissions lines to 19 First Nations communities in Northern Ontario. We've got Enoch Cree Nation doing fabulous work in terms of solar and other types of technologies and clean tech, but they're building resiliency, and they're building resiliency for their communities. And so, as you know, we didn't always start with a crown corporation. We started with an interested group of citizens that
Yeah.
needed certainty around electricity and power generation when we
Mhm.
first got started in Saskatchewan. We need to revisit that, and we need to revisit that for Indigenous communities who
Mhm.
want to get off diesel, for example.
Mhm.
So talking to the Haida Gwaii and seeing that yesterday, there's a world of opportunity in terms of decarbonizing their electricity systems on
Mhm.
islands that are hard to serve.
Yeah.
So we need to find that opportunity and help to support them.
Yeah.
FNPA is all about helping to support and bring that experience to the table.
That's really cool. Yeah, there was a lot of presentations, and it's exciting because people are very interested in cleaner and sustainable energy,
Hmm.
and that's really important. And so, I think I've known for quite some time as there's a lot of these communities that are pretty reliant on diesel generation and how it's brought in and stuff like that. But I've also heard discussed, and tell us maybe a little bit about that. Is there an opportunity for things like micro or small modular to support some of these communities as a power source?
Yeah, I think the future is
Mhm.
going to be about a combination of technologies,
Mhm.
probably solar and battery, probably nuclear, solar and battery.
Yeah.
So in combination, if it's small hydro, I think the smaller, more modular projects will prove to be hopefully economical one
Yeah.
day. Micro modular reactor development is still a challenge. It's
Mhm.
cost prohibitive. It's still on par with diesel.
Yeah.
But if we really want to get serious about the environment, even if it costs the same as what the federal government is paying for diesel for these Indigenous communities in Northern Canada, we should be dare to dream big about
Mhm.
the right mix of public investment and
Yeah.
private investment and actually drive down that cost. And I think Canada has a proud nuclear history. We need to embrace and be proud of that. So I think the
Hmm.
federal government and in partnership with provincial governments, Indigenous governments need to
Hmm.
find a solution. I think
Yeah.
we're well on our way there.
Yeah, that's, and you raised a really important point. I think one that, like, you guys work across, all, I think, energy types, and talk about solar, hydro, wind, biomass, nuclear, and even LNG.
Right.
You raised this point, and this is one of the things I think is so interesting and so important, and I'm glad to hear it. It's that it could be a mix, right? One
Mhm.
type might not necessarily be, appropriate in terms of the geography, in terms of the,
Right.
available sunlight, in terms of, in terms of wind velocities, in terms of being, geopolitically or even geologically stable. Like, there's objective, I think, reasons to choose what, and then of course economic, right? So how
Mhm.
involved are you guys to ensure there's that type of objectivity? What are the community? What's the best solution that is not as interested in, okay, we got to push this particular
Right.
gas doesn't make sense here, or
Yeah.
nuclear doesn't make sense, or solar, right? And so how do you stay kind of agnostic and then say this is, from a merit and from a technical and from economic, this is kind of the best
Well, that's a great
option
question.
mix? Yeah.
And it's probably on the minds of a lot of policymakers and a lot of citizens who
Mm.
utilize these various sources of energy.
Yeah.
Some of them are more emitting than others.
Hmm.
Some of them are more available in certain regions of Canada than others.
Hmm.
And so we have to work with what is available. It's just like
Yeah.
in the past, how do we ensure we keep our homes warm?
Hmm.
We do so with the available resources that are there. So if it's biomass,
Yeah.
the Meadow Lake Tribal Council has done some fabulous work in terms of adding value to an
Hmm.
already existing sawmill.
Yeah.
And the BC forestry sector right now is suffering
Hmm.
some mill closures. And so I think what we're going to see is we're going to find innovative ways to maximize the available resources so that
Hmm.
we can build and diversify economies. Indigenous-led initiatives is what this is all about. We think that when people come up with innovative solutions for their region or their community, new power generation and new economies will eventually return.
Hmm.
Um, Albeit there's tariff challenges with
Hmm.
softwood lumber and other types of commodities. We make the best with what we have.
Yeah.
And if it's the policy environment is adversely affecting our operations in Canada, we have to be able to serve ourselves domestically.
Hmm.
But we also have to not forget about Indigenous communities because we still suffer with energy insecurity.
Yeah.
So this is the opportunity for building new pipelines or new oil and gas or new bitumen pipelines to the West Coast, that we also ensure that Indigenous communities benefit from that too, either
Hmm.
economically, financially, socially, and
Yeah.
help to build our business strength. And
Hmm.
so this is the secret to the next coming months and years, where the proof will be in the pudding of whether we actually meaningfully engage our Indigenous communities as rightful stakeholders in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both from Saskatchewan, but we're both actually sitting down here in BC
Hmm.
at the BC, Energy or Clean Energy Forum. And it's exciting hearing some of the opportunities, the investment that these communities are making. But they're also saying that engaging with the industry and industry in the past has not necessarily always been as fruitful, right? And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
and you highlight the importance of meaningful engagement. But we've heard from, community leaders that spoke to dams that increased water levels and flooded out territories,
Hmm.
and projects that were farms that were wind farms or solar that were built without consent and support and might affect migratory patterns or their ability to use in the area or whatnot. But if you're going to build a pipeline, you're going to build a wind farm, you're going to build a nuclear generating,
Hmm.
power plant. It's incredibly important to include in community, but enrich and involve them so that I think the biggest issue I've seen is that their participation is respective of the risk that they take in regards to their rights. And I think that's what's changing is,
It is.
and so the risk to our rights was really, we felt was ignored and treated as negligible now. And that's where the fight is on, is not necessarily Indigenous people against development. It's just that we're against a very disproportionate evaluation of the risk to our rights and the benefits that should come from them, right? And so,
Absolutely.
so yeah, you raise a good point. Meaningful engagement, economic enrichment, that is appropriate. That is appropriate in regards to the risks that Indigenous people bear on those rights. And I think Canada's struggling with that a little bit, but
Yeah.
we're taking them along. We're
Yeah.
carrying them along.
I'm
So,
proud to say that we actually get it, traditional knowledge, and that's always been overlooked by industry and by
hmm
governments, and
hmm
that's not the case today.
yeah.
The Assessment Agency of Canada ensures that a variety of different lenses are looked at. And so
hmm
what we say is we're going to braid Indigenous environmental impact assessments and the impact assessment frameworks that we adopt as policy and as
hmm
law are fully recognized in our treaty and traditional territories.
hmm
And so, anytime you enrich current regulatory processes with
hmm
Indigenous-led environmental processes or assessments or assessment tools,
hmm
it can only mean more certainty. And so, more certainty means that we actually embrace traditional knowledge as a way of dealing with those migratory patterns of wind projects or otherwise, or pipeline spills, or different types of
hmm
what is it that we can bring to the table in terms of mitigating risks. And
hmm
so I'm proud to say that FNPA is a national, if not a world
hmm
leader in Indigenous engagement. And there's a lot of export potential in terms of skill sets and experiences we have in Canada that can be exportable to the world. And south of the border, there's lots of intertribal trade and development
hmm
opportunities I think we can take advantage of.
There's room for improvement. It's getting better. It is getting better, but
Yeah.
there's certainly room for improvement. Um, when we talked about the different energy types, which are you most excited about right now? All the different energy types and the policy advocacy you're doing, where do you think is they're kind of the most interest, I should say, right now?
From Guy Lonechild's point
Guy
of
Lone
view
Child's
or from
perspective.
Indigenous point of view?
Uh,
I can answer both.
yeah, let's do both.
I think it's too early to say that Indigenous communities are excited about nuclear because
hmm
there's so many questions around nuclear safety that need to be
Yeah.
answered. Safe storage. What's the long-term approach? What's Canada's approach to safe storage of
hmm
spent fuel? What's our answer to enriched fuel that has to
hmm
come from south of the border? If you ask Guy Lonechild, I'm very excited about our prospects in nuclear as potentially world leaders, not just in owners and operators of nuclear plants, but also the next technicians, the next nuclear
hmm
scientists. We have young Michaela Woodward, who's actually going out to Hamilton to
hmm
study nuclear engineering from Nipawin, Saskatchewan, your
Yeah.
neck of the woods there.
Yeah.
Very proud. A
mhm,
young Métis woman, very
Yeah.
smart. I get excited about young people like that
Yeah.
pursuing their careers.
Yeah.
That's what gets me up in the morning. On the other side, on the practical side of things, what poses the greatest potential, I think, for offsetting electricity costs is
hmm
solar power,
Yeah.
solar generation. And that helps to create the self-sufficiency and lower the cost of electricity in First Nations and Métis communities. So
hmm
I'm
hmm
very bullish on solar. The prices have been coming down for a
hmm
long time now, and
Yeah.
it's only going to get more affordable. And battery storage. So couple that with solar with battery storage,
Yeah.
you'll start to see affordability be more achievable.
mm,
And when I talk about bread and butter issues, whether it's in my
Yeah.
political career or even in the
Yeah.
role I'm doing now,
Yeah.
it's about addressing the bread and butter issues for our
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, it is, right? And then those could actually have immediate results. And I mean, I think there's a policy environment that makes very practical and very possible. And it's just a matter of organizing and mobilizing our communities to get it done. And
Hmm.
so, and support those communities and support those people that want to have those type of offsetting technologies right there at home. We know people, people invest in them privately, and I don't think there's any reason why we can't, um, invest in our communities like that as well too,
Yeah,
right?
just even the
Yeah.
most recent imports on steel and
Yeah.
making wind turbines less affordable because of tariffs. We should be maybe building wind turbines in Canada and other types of components and assemblies and
hmm
manufacturing plants. And
Yeah.
so we've got some plans around the corner for doing
hmm
just that in Western Canada.
Yeah. Absolutely. So talk a little bit about policy. If you could change a policy or even just a specific barrier within policies that would accelerate Indigenous-led and owned development and power, what would it be? Is there that one thing out there? It's like, you know what, if this was changed or reformed or repealed, or if we understood this differently, we'd see far
Right.
more Indigenous-led power
Well,
development.
not enough attention is being paid to the regulatory system in
hmm
terms of approvals, licensing,
hmm
regulating. whether that any kind of
Yeah.
generation needs to have an Indigenous lens. Jurisdiction needs to be respected. The policy making of Indigenous governments needs to be recognized in this country. And we continue to run up against hurdles of the utility model where it's a
Mhm.
monopoly. The
Mhm.
SAS Power Corporations Act is a fantastic, probably one of the best examples where policies need to be changed so that it's not just about the bottom line for a provincial crown. We
Mhm.
actually have to see meaningful economic participation, whether that's gas distribution with Sask
Mhm.
Energy, creating our own microsystem, microenergy systems, whether it's wind, solar, battery storage, a combination of gas, combination of nuclear. One
Mhm.
day, we need to open up, I think,
Mhm.
the space for Indigenous utilities to exist.
Mm.
And so the BC Utilities Commission commissioned a study, as you know, about 6 years ago or
Mhm.
so, talking about the establishment of micro utilities in
Yeah.
First Nations communities in BC. So I think the future is our own gas distribution networks, our
Yeah.
own energy systems,
Yeah.
ownership of that. Again, the maintaining, building, owning, operating of those systems.
Yeah, you just got it inspired a thought here. And so what jurisdictions you think are got it and they're doing well? You spoke to Ontario, you spoke to all the ownership
Hmm.
and transmission, and you spoke a little bit about BC. So what districts, what jurisdictions get it? What are some of the benefits of them getting it?
Right.
And what are some of the issues that jurisdictions they lack that necessarily, that level of involvement or enrichment or ownership? And
Right.
then what are the challenges that they continue to face?
Well, one of the best examples, I think, is Alaska.
Hmm.
Alaska Native Development Corporations
Hmm.
have seen it upon themselves to develop their own electricity cooperatives, distribution of electrons and distribution of their energy systems. So likely that is the model that I can point to that's probably the best model that
Yeah.
creates a local ownership and a local involvement
Hmm.
in creating new economic opportunity and building their economy. Again, I think there are microsystems. I think it's the Blue Lake Rancheria out of
Hmm.
Northern California that has their own microgrid
Hmm.
system, and they own it, they
Hmm.
maintain it, they hire their own people to maintain and create opportunities in the
Hmm.
time of climate change where there's power outages and
Hmm.
forest fires. We need to build resiliency in the grid. We see some small pilot projects in northern Saskatchewan in terms of microgrid development in some of the Métis communities as well. So that's
Hmm.
really positive. I think we have to not just do small pilot projects. We have to think bold and think big. And so I think for us, um, establishing our own wires and our own distribution networks, I think
Yeah.
all of that and maintaining them. Yeah, start to think about how we retool places like Saskatchewan where there's an increasing and emerging population of Indigenous people. Manitoba, again,
Hmm.
Manitoba Hydro is, I think, got some really good things going on with ownership of large scale
Hmm.
uh, hydro dam infrastructure. So we're not without in Canada. We
Yeah.
actually do have some really good examples.
Hmm.
We just have to be, ensure that there's some kind of a long-term vision for a meaningful involvement
Hmm.
and actually not set our expectations too low. In Saskatchewan, I think we need to set our expectations a little higher and just
Hmm.
go for go
Go for it.
go for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, like you hear of examples of in Ontario, some First Nation ownership and energy power producing projects, right? And you start to think, what is, there's a, we'd like to at the IRN, we love to explore kind of the socio-technical, but also the business case behind everything. And there's a strong business case to that type of ownership and support. Yeah, it's still in the public interest. Like it's still a good thing. And I think people just need to get over their kind of reservations. The reservation in terms of Indigenous ownership is good. Is a public interest thing. It could be a good thing. It is a good thing. It's showing where there is Indigenous ownership and infrastructure and projects, and
Right.
and start to see more of it, right? And so in line with what we're seeing right across Canada. So that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about a couple different things. You talked about the youth and you gave a
Hmm.
really good example. So, what would you say to a young person that's not sure where they want to go in their life in terms of the opportunities that exist within the spaces that FNPA and you occupy? What would you
Hmm.
say to young people inspire opportunities in there?
I would say that, don't limit yourself, believe in yourself. That's where it all starts. The,
Hmm.
the fire starts when you actually are inspired by somebody that you meet, a John Desley walking
Hmm.
on the street, somebody that has, chosen a very good path for himself, mentorship.
Hmm.
Look for a mentor. It may not be in electricity. It may be in just infrastructure. If you like playing video games, there's
Yeah.
opportunities to do 3D modeling with construction techniques and
Mhm.
design techniques. So uh, dare to dream outside the box, not
Mhm.
just become the teacher, even though the teacher is
Yeah.
awesome, like,
Yeah.
or being a lawyer is great. My daughter's a lawyer, but
Mm.
those aren't the only occupations.
Yeah.
There's science and engineering and
Yeah.
math and environmental studies. Something that is something that you can get excited about. The key is also surrounding yourself with good people in the place you work or in the social circles you have. Make
Mhm.
sure that they're the right people that are surrounding you with not just the love and support that you rightfully deserve, but have their own paths and create that sense of oneness in our
Mhm.
community, because we need our young people. We need
Yeah.
them to be healthy. We need them to be productive, and we need them to be, contributing members of society in very meaningful ways. And if it's the trades, we are seeing a real attrition of tradespeople in Canada and Canada's economy. And we won't be able to build the infrastructure we're talking about if we don't have tradespeople. So
Yeah.
there's some things that are non-conventional people don't think about
Yeah.
that we want you to think about, and reach out to the FNPA or organizations like your own
Yeah.
and say, hey, here's what's going on at McGill University in Montreal in terms of clean tech
Mhm.
research. Here's what's happening, Master, or here's what's happening at the University of Saskatchewan with their nuclear management program. There's lots of resources out there.
There's a lot of people like yourself that have succeeded and want to see others succeed,
Oh, yeah.
and will create pathways like in absolutely do that outreach and then support anyone that kind of wants to do that. That's really incredible. So you spoke a little bit about that. Talked about trades. What do you think government or industry need to do to step up to ensure that there's the appropriate environment and supports for Indigenous people to pursue opportunities like
Yeah.
that?
We just heard Premier David Eby speak about a $215 million investment into post-secondary system
Hmm.
and vocational and trades training. That's a tremendous
Hmm.
investment. Because they realize that their economy won't grow without skilled people, skilled tradespeople,
Hmm.
and skilled people in the workforce. Those are meaningful investments. And
Hmm.
so I see government stepping up to do just that. The Ontario government, FNPA, has partnered with the Organization for Canadian Nuclear Industries in the past to get
Hmm.
Indigenous women in the trade sector. So
Hmm.
welding, nuclear welding, electricians, all of those that would help to bolster their provincial economy. The Ontario government stepped up. I'd love to see Manitoba, Saskatchewan do similar type of investments and focus it on Indigenous people, because we're not going to see an economic reconciliation without meaningful participation by Indigenous people in the economy. So that's
Yeah.
probably the area that I would say is probably the most vital and strategic at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an incredibly important area to invest. And you're right. Love hearing announcements about the investment and seeing meaningful, equitable participation of people in those different sectors, right? That's incredibly important. So I think, of course, there's the issues of the day. And we've got engaged in a conversation, which is a little bit uncomfortable, but important. And you're no stranger to stepping up in terms of where things look a little controversial and political. And so, recently, over the last year, and then more recently, we've seen a lot of policy come out. And we've heard yesterday about Bill 14 in BC, which is, looks a lot like Bill 5 in Ontario, which looks a little bit like Bill C5 and
Mm.
from a federal perspective, and that's the Major Projects Office and the development of, Build Baby Build. We've now seen an MOU from Alberta and Canada. I don't necessarily want to talk about kind of the merits of and the issues and stuff like that, but fundamentally, what do you think Indigenous people are having such issues with these particular policies, and where those concerns come from in terms of these policies overstepping rights? So what do you think are some of the major issues? And then, in terms of overstepping rights. And so where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think some of these are challenges that we haven't necessarily created.
Hmm.
We are sort of the victims of
Hmm.
decisions and consultations that either did or did
Yeah.
not happen between
Yeah.
various levels of government, whether that
Yeah.
be federal, provincial, territorial discussions or international discussions with
Hmm.
the introduction of tariffs in the United States. It's kind of forced our hand to think differently about how we diversify and strengthen the Canadian economy. But we can't do this without Indigenous peoples say so.
Hmm.
We do have something called Bill C-15 in Canada that talks about the United Nations Declaration of
Hmm.
Rights of Indigenous Peoples
Yeah.
and free, prior, informed consent.
Yeah.
And so if we really want to bring meaning to that and sprinkle that throughout Canada's legislative framework, we have to ensure that at all levels, there are federal, provincial commitments to dialogue with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We
Mm-hmm.
have Section 35 rights in this country. And what really gets the backs up against Indigenous leadership is when they are not involved in any kind of conversations in a meaningful way. We
Yeah.
have very brilliant and bright Indigenous people
Mm.
in this country at the political level
Yeah.
and in the business community. And so I say let's not rush too fast
Mm-hmm.
until we actually do this together. If we
Mm-hmm.
want to go far in this country, we have to do it together with
Yeah.
Indigenous people. And a true Team Canada approach, I believe, is an Indigenous-led approach. And that really flips the switch when it comes to recognizing and honoring the
Mm-hmm.
uniqueness of the First Peoples in this country.
Absolutely. Like, and, you said it quite well. Developing legislation that is intended to kind of move at the speed of business and all that type of things. And that's incredibly great and important. But doing it again, nothing about us without us, paternalistic,
Mm-hmm.
doing it so quickly,
Mm.
and that's fine. But even in not involving Indigenous people in that quick process, I find I have to say, why are people surprised? Why is the public, why is government, why is industry surprised when they have such strong opposition? Not fundamentally about what it's trying to do. It's about, I think, you see the MOU, there is strong unanimous support seen at the AFN level. It's because where were the conversations with Indigenous people prior to the development of that relationship?
Right.
Why isn't the MOU between Alberta, Canada, and the Indigenous people potentially impacted along that route, right? And so it's tough, and it advances that level of distrust. It's tough for Indigenous people to say, why do we keep hearing about FPIC? Why do we keep hearing about, the importance of a meaningful engagement and consent?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's now this new act. Now there's this new memorandum of understanding. Now there's this new legislation. Yes, they're going to come, but it's all developed for the most part, and then they're going to come and engage us. So it's I always find it funny that politicians and Canadian politicians and provincial politicians, it's like, yeah, what's the issues? Like,
I guess what came to mind for me when I saw the resolution that was
yeah,
passed at the Assembly of First Nations, I thought, oh,
yeah,
they've awoken the sleeping giant. And the giant is together with Indigenous people as stewards of the land and Mother Earth and the sacredness of water and
mm-hmm,
our spirituality and our undying commitment to protecting our identity has really I think I'm not going to say pushed government into a corner because I think this is a bit self-inflicted by government. But when you don't meaningfully consult with Indigenous people, there is going to be pushback. And so we need to find some commonality in the room, some
mm-hmm,
common ground. Meaningful engagement leads to better socioeconomic outcomes for Indigenous people. I think that's going to be the saw-off, and it's going to be the
mm-hmm,
opportunity of a lifetime for us as a country.
mm-hmm,
But we need to do this in a very thoughtful way. I'm happy to see that there's some movement on getting federal and provincial and First Nations and Métis Inuit leaders into a room, into
mm-hmm.
a First
Yeah,
Ministers meeting. So
yeah,
that's really
yeah,
encouraging. But it's not where we stop in terms of one meeting. We have to really have actual
ongoing.
tangible and ongoing commitment to
Yeah,
resource revenue sharing is another thing.
mm,
And so we've heard that from the Assembly. We think we
mm-hmm,
need to see much more of that, and we need to
mm-hmm,
keep pushing in that direction.
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Equity where equity makes sense, but resource revenue sharing certainly is, I think, part of table stakes. And then, yeah, a big part of that is, you're right. It's when you leave out of those important conversations, backs are going to go against the wall,
Yeah.
and we're going to regress the relationship. I think that's been built in terms of how do we do this together, right?
Yeah.
And one other thing I find it really interesting, it's when we think about consultation and that duty and the legality around it, the duty applies to decisions. So if you're going to build something, where's the duty? You can understand the impacts. When you're creating legislation, the duty's not necessarily, the legal duty's not necessarily there, but they've committed and discussed and UNDRIP and action plan and yes, while Canada has, its ability to make laws and whatnot,
Right.
it also says that it recognizes the sovereignty of Indigenous people and in self-government. So Like you can't kind of have one and the same. You can't,
Right.
yes, we're going to make laws independent and totally disregard, but then also recognize you're sovereign and self-governing. So I think, so if, if Canada is it's going to develop laws, it also has to understand like how it's going to impact, sovereign, self-governing First Peoples, and how do we include that in the process, right? And I think we're really struggling with that. We need to figure that out quick, especially when we need to create legislation that moves at the speed of the world economy. Something else we're kind of thrust into, and we don't necessarily take a lot of time talking today about. It's not surprising, right?
That's what we saw just last week when President Trump is contemplating tariffs on fertilizer. In Saskatchewan, we say that we feed the world from the fertilizer that comes from our traditional territories in Saskatchewan. And so food security is another thing in terms of arable land and the available markets to Canadian fertilizer. But Canadian fertilizer is also Indigenous fertilizer. So we need to be able to say, okay, if we're going to create synergies in trade, then it should be Indigenous-led. If we're going to create frameworks for trade, we should have intertribal trade in Turtle Island here. But we should also be interfacing with other foreign governments as well and developing our own Indigenous net benefits test. Similar to what we have with the Investment Canada Act and Canadian net benefits test. So too, do we need an Indigenous net benefits test? And that may look different from time to time. So we've got a bit of a pitch to the federal government, NRCan, right now about looking at what does success look like in terms of 5 different case studies across the country. And what does this Indigenous net benefits test look like in various parts of the Canadian economy? And so we're hoping and hopeful that that's going to be something that we'll partner with the government of Canada on.
Yeah, no, then it's that type of movement that's making a big difference, right? And so, in my experience, there's so many issues. We talk about ownership from a colonial perspective. We talk about wealth. We talk about all sorts of things, and none of these are going to be changed overnight, right? They're going to take innovative programs like what you talked about, innovative programs like the loan guarantee, address kind of the issues of that fee simple. Of course, there's a lot of issues in terms of what that looks like that we need to work through in terms of Indigenous title, ownership, and everything. But the infrastructure and systems of the day, we need innovative kind of thought processes around how do we work within that, and then we transition into a more appropriate and respectful model that respects the Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and how we governed, how we traded, and then how the existing infrastructure exists today, right?
That's right.
So so there's a lot of incredible opportunities out there. And then again, proud to know you, proud of the work that you do through your organization and as an individual. So I'm incredibly grateful that you were able to spend some time with us today, Guy. Well, thank you for being a guest with us. Is there anything you'd like to tell our audience? I think last word with Guy.
Oh, I'm a big supporter of yours too, John. Always have and always made that very known to people. Make me very proud, and a lot of our people do too. So just keep up the good work that you're doing on behalf of your organization, from ours to yours.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Guy. Right on.
So my name is Guy Lonechild. I'm the President and CEO of the First Nations Power Authority, and a very proud supporter of Indigenous Resource Network, and a big proud supporter of John Desjardins as Executive Director.